Hey gamers, how's it going? Daybreaker Rein here, coming at you through your video scope with just another gaming rant, and today we're going to be looking at some old news. And I know that that's kind of weird, but this news is about a week old. A little late to the party on this one, and I'm sure a lot of gaming outlets have already talked about it and already put in their 2 cents, but I figured, why the hell not? You know what? I'm going to go ahead and put my 2 cents in. So the article we're going to be looking at is one article done by GameRant.com. It will be linked in the description so you can check it out for yourself, as well as the concept video that is linked in the article itself. I'll link that separately if you just want to check out the concept video for yourself. So a company called Curved/Labs has decided to concept out what they feel would be a counterpart to the Nintendo Switch and basically be a PlayStation Switch, more or less. They have dubbed this concept the Sony Playman. And I'm interested because for a long time I've really felt that Sony could make a really good handheld. The PSP was a great handheld, and it still is to this day. They're affordable, a lot of the games aren't super expensive, and they're easy as crap to mod. So if you know your just budget isn't in the market for buying physical games, ISOs aren't that hard to get a hold of. So PSPs are not bad, and you can do a lot of things with them nowadays. The PlayStation Vita, I loved the PlayStation Vita. I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody that I was a huge fan of the PlayStation Vita. I was more in favor of the PlayStation Vita than I was the Nintendo 3DS. That's not to say that I don't like the Nintendo 3DS. I went through the ringer with the Nintendo 3DS. I had, at one point, all versions. I had the regular 3DS, then I went to the XL, and then I went to the new 3DS XL. So I went through the gauntlet with that. And I like the Nintendo 3DS. I wish I played it more often than I do. Trying to get back into it with the few games that I have for it. But besides the point, I was more in favor of the Vita, obviously. Not to say, again, that I hated the 3DS or that I thought the 3DS was inferior. I thought that the Vita was just filled more of my niche, if you will, because it really kind of pulled at the strings of the genres that I like with a lot of the JRPGs that were available on the market, and I found some really great games, and games like Freedom Wars and Soul Sacrifice. Soul Sacrifice Delta being my all-time favorite Vita game, and I just absolutely resonated with that game as a whole. Was absolutely in love with it. Was one of the first Vita games I platinumed, and then I got Delta, which is the upgraded version, and haven't beaten it, but I beat the main story, but I haven't done everything that there is to do, because some of those missions take a really long time. But that's a story for another day. But I really like the idea of a potential new handheld from Sony. Now, this article does address that there has been a patent for a Switch-like console from Sony, but there hasn't been any official statement or word on whether or not this console is going to be coming out anytime soon, if it's in development, what its project name is. Maybe we might get something at E3, fingers crossed. If not at E3 this year, maybe Tokyo Game Show. If not at Tokyo Game Show, then probably maybe sometime next year if it's really going to see the light of day. So I want to go ahead and put the picture of the concept up here of the Sony Playman. So it's going to be this picture with the two controllers and then the screen itself. So really the only thing I'm liking about this, judging by this concept picture, is the way that they designed the core unit itself. You got that flat back, and then the screen kind of pops up almost like a foldable tablet, which I think is a really good design choice, because with that flat back you can obviously put all the designated ports and things like that for charging and AC play and all that good stuff. So I think that's a good design choice overall. Having hands-on with the Nintendo Switch, it's not to say that the Switch's screen or overall design is a really bad design. I actually think that the Nintendo Switch is pretty good in its own right. I know a lot of people did address the issue with the kickstand and the power unit on the bottom of the console being kind of an issue, because you can't really pop up the kickstand and play it in that form when it's charging. But I do know Hiyori did release an accessory that's sort of like a kickstand, or like a stand in general, that you kind of plant the Nintendo Switch on, and it lets the cord kind of come out and do its own thing. So that's available. Granted, I feel that's a pretty bad design choice if another company had to cash in on making an accessory for it, but it's there if people do really find it an issue. But that's really the only thing I'm liking about the concept of the Sony Playman. I don't think Sony needs to make a Switch ripoff or Sony Switch, if you will. One of the big things I think that was really the Vita killer, if anything, was the fact that it was really gimmicky. You had a front touchscreen and a back touchscreen, and a lot of games did utilize those in some form or fashion. Now, there are several games in the Vita library that don't, but a lot of the really good ones, such as the Uncharted game, the Gravity Rush being one of the big ones, and Little Big Planet for the Vita, all use these touch mechanics. And some of them even have the kind of almost motion control, like gyro sort of thing going on with the Vita as well. And I think that really killed the potential of what that console could be. I think what a lot of us Sony fans wanted was, we really wanted just a successor to the PSP that focused on what made the PSP good. The PSP didn't have any gimmicks. Now, it didn't have all the necessary buttons for a lot of the games that were available. Not gonna lie, it would have been helpful to have a second joystick and maybe 2 additional shoulder buttons. And I think that's what we really wanted. We really more or less wanted the PlayStation controller with a screen in the middle. That's really what I think a lot of Sony fans wanted. But we unfortunately didn't get that with the Vita, not without, proper attachments and things like that, and accessories you have to buy, which are kind of pointless and moot at this point. But I really feel that that's one of the reasons that the Vita was not a success here in the West. Another thing is I really feel that the games were catering more towards a niche audience, that there was a lot of JRPGs, and not everybody loves the JRPGs. The appeal of the 3DS was that there were, like, pretty much all your notable Nintendo stuff you could get on the 3DS, like your Mario games, your Zelda games, the few here other games, there was Mario Kart and stuff like that, all the notable stuff. There were tons of them. There were tons of games that were notable with the characters that everybody has grown up to love from the Nintendo brand, as well as the port of Super Smash Bros. 4 on 3DS. So, on top of that, there were also the JRPGs out there, the Monster Hunter games, but there was enough on the market that I think it really drew in a lot of those people who really like Nintendo, and it really catered to them in that regard. With the Vita, we really didn't get too many of the brand names or the exclusive IPs to the Sony brand like Uncharted. We did get an Uncharted game, but as I said earlier, it did have touch mechanics. We did get a Killzone game, which Killzone Mercenary for the Vita is great. It's probably the best shooter that the Vita has to offer, which sucks because there were other shooters, but I don't think they did nearly as well as Killzone Mercenary. I actually think that Killzone Mercenary, there's still a online community for that. But at its core, it really was a JRPG machine. It really catered more to the JRPG scene than any other handheld. And another big thing is that there was kind of a lack of compatibility. You could only use the pre-designated game cards for the Vita, and you couldn't play your PSP games unless you re-downloaded them through the PlayStation Network. And not every PSP game worked on the Vita, as well as not every PS1 game. Now, the backwards compatibility was there. There were PSP games and PS1 games you could download and put on your Vita, but not every single one of them. There were a couple of games specifically that I was hyped for having access to that didn't even work on the PlayStation TV, like Castlevania Dracula X Chronicles. So I think that's kind of another thing that was really a killer, because the Nintendo 3DS not only had its virtual console, but it also had backwards compatibility with all DS titles that were previously released. So all your Marios, your Zeldas, your Donkey Kongs, your Kirbys, all those games worked just fine on the 3DS, while you had to repurchase games like that on the Vita. So that's another thing. Also, the memory stick was a big problem with the Vita, I feel. Being that it was an exclusive format, it was super expensive to get a really high gig card, around the $90, $100 range for the best cards that you could possibly get, and there wasn't any other alternative. You didn't have like 2 memory card slots or anything. You had 1 memory card slot and 1 memory card. And not gonna lie, when it came to digital purchases, that data got eaten up pretty quick. Like with the game cards themselves, a lot of the game was run straight off the game card, so you didn't have to worry too much about consuming too much space when it came to physical market on the Vita. However, when it came to digital stuff like Soul Sacrifice Delta, Soul Sacrifice being probably my favorite game on the Vita, and Delta being the upgrade, but it was only released digitally here in the West, it eats up about 9-10 gigs of the card. So that's a huge issue. If Sony were to go with a new handheld, that's something that they really would have to address, is that they would have to either make a cheaper, affordable format of memory card, go back to the Pro Stick Duo if they really need to, because those aren't super expensive to get a hold of, or just follow suit with what Nintendo's doing and use SD or micro SD cards, because not only are those cheaper and more affordable, you can get a big micro SD card for cheap, and I think it would entice people to buy more games because they have the space kicking around on their unit to be able to get as many games as they possibly can. So probably the biggest thing, though, with the Vita, I would say, is that it just did not have good advertisement here in the West. It came out around the time where the PS3 was ending and the PS4 was coming out. And the way that the Vita was promoted, especially the first line Vitas, because some of the first line Vitas had the 3G compatibility, which is a neat thing. It's a neat idea to have 3G on a handheld. The only problem is that if you tried to go activate it through a provider, which I'm sure a lot of people weren't aware of this, you would have to pay a separate fee on top of if you already have a phone and or plan. You'd have to make a brand new plan just for the Vita itself to get the 3G activated, which again in of itself is a big problem, because I don't think anybody's going to want to pay a subscription fee to use 3G data access to play their games on the go. And that was really one of the big kickers, is that the Vita was promoted here in the West to have this backwards compatibility access with the PlayStation 3, to where you could leave your PlayStation 3 on, you could take your Vita with you and access your PS3, and you could play your PS3 games on your Vita. And that just was not the case with the PlayStation Vita, unfortunately. There were very, very few games that worked via remote play on the PlayStation Vita. And the only two notable ones I can even think of is BlazBlue Calamity Trigger and the Shadow of the Colossus / Ico HD collection. Because it was something about the developers had to make the choice if they wanted their games to be remote play compatible, and a lot of developers just didn't. I think a lot of developers had their sights already on the PS4, so they thought it was kind of a moot point to make PS3 games compatible. So I think that was probably the biggest letdown, if anything, was that the idea is that the Vita was supposed to be this counteractive thing to where you could connect to your PS3 and play your PS3 games, and that just wasn't the case. Now, I really think had the Vita been released alongside the PS4, it probably would have been way more successful. The PS4 library has a lot of remote play options. You can play your PS4 from your Vita and play a lot of the games that are out there on the market, which is great. And I think that's what we really wanted more than anything, and that's what it should have been. So I think the PS4 and the Vita should have been more in line with releasing with each other, as opposed to the PS Vita coming out before and then being promoted to work with the PS3 when it really didn't. So needless to say, I'm all for a new console, a new handheld from Sony, but they really have to look at the flaws of the Vita and just work out those flaws. And unfortunately, with this concept of the Sony Playman, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing another gimmicky console that I don't think people are going to jump on. And I really feel that they just need to drop the gimmicks. They need to just give us exactly like what I said earlier, a PlayStation controller with a screen in between and all the gizmos and gadgets, and a way for backwards compatibility. Now, I would think that if this new handheld was backwards compatible with the Vita library, that would probably be a good selling point, because a lot of those games that people didn't get to play, they could play on this better, more superior handheld and or portable console. So, all that being said, there's another point in this article I want to address, because they mentioned that this company wants to also be able to make this device compatible with a slimmed down version of the PS4 Slim that could be taken on the go and attached to the unit itself. sounding a bit familiar, like all those CD-based add-ons that they made for all those different consoles, like the Jaguar, the Atari Jaguar. This idea, I have to say, I would really think that that would be a game changer. Now, I'm not sure how exactly that would work. I mean, I'm no electrical engineer or anything like that, so I'm not savvy in that sort of thing. I mean, I think it's definitely possible. Convenient, I don't necessarily know. The PS4 is kind of bulky as is, so I don't necessarily know how they're going to be able to slim that down further to make it an attachment for a portable unit. But I really do feel that that would be a game changer because unfortunately the Nintendo Switch doesn't have any backwards compatibility at the moment with any sort of prior technology. Now, there have been hints and rumors that there might be GameCube compatibility, like there might actually be GameCube games showing up on the Virtual Console. And of course, there have been a couple ports of games such as Mario Kart 8 being ported to the Switch. But the Switch doesn't really have backwards compatibility like that, so that would actually really be interesting to see if that's something that actually does see the light of day. Again, this is all rumors and speculation at the moment. We don't really know. Sony hasn't said anything official. We can only hope that somewhere down the line we get something official, but I think that's going to be it for me for this video, guys. So if you guys enjoyed what you heard and heard me out all the way through this, I appreciate it. Appreciate the view. If you guys want to let me know what you think and what you think Sony should do, if they were to jump on the handheld portable console market like what Nintendo's doing, let me know down in the comments what you think. Leave a like, leave a dislike if you like. I know I talk forever, so I apologize about that. Feel free to subscribe if you like this content. I'm really trying to find more subject matter to really talk about in this series, and I know they're not really necessarily angry rants or anything like that. It's more or less just me kind of talking about something that I see in gaming related media that I really want to discuss and kind of open a discussion floor for. So I think that's going to be all, and as always, guys, this has been Daybreaker Rein, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take it easy, guys.